Last month, Nvidia released the RTX 5090 and 5080. Well, they sort of did. Some of you, maybe 10 of you, were able to buy an RTX 5090 with, let's say, 80 of you getting a 5080. So, technically they were released, but then some of those 5090s have now melted. So even less of you have one. But hey, I'm sure there's more coming. Anyway, the disappointing 5090 and 5080 launch aside, we now have the RTX 5070 Ti to deal with, a cut-down version of the 5080 using the same GB203 die. The 5070 Ti is actually a far more interesting product in my opinion, as you are still getting the same 16GB VRAM buffer, but instead of costing $1,000 US, which is a criminal price tag for a 16GB graphics card in 2025, the MSRP is, I'm going to say, alleged to be $750 US. Today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Thermaltake and their Tower 300 Micro Tower case, along with the TH360 V2 Ultra EX ARGB Sync all-in-one liquid cooler. The Tower 300 supports mini ITX and micro ATX motherboards with 4 expansion slots. The unique design is intended to support the latest and greatest hardware, such as the latest GeForce RTX 50 series GPUs, while still maintaining a compact footprint, and on top of that, does so in a configuration that best shows off all of your glorious hardware, including your motherboard, graphics card, and AIO. As for the liquid cooler, the TH360 V2 Ultra EX AIO is equipped with 3 CT120EX ARGB sync fans, and the pump housing includes an LCD display, which can be used to monitor hardware vitals or more serious stuff like your favorite memes. So for more information, please check the link in the video description. Now, I know Nvidia's MSRPs are about as accurate as my aim, trying to play Fortnite after a few too many drinks, but I think the 5070 Ti pricing will be a little bit more realistic, given this product is likely to face some competition from AMD, but again, it may take quite a few weeks before we see realistic pricing, and I'm certainly not guaranteeing this. But if the 5070 Ti can hit the $750 US MSRP, then I think it will almost certainly be a much better buy than the RTX 5080. And this is because it'll cost at least 25% less, likely quite a bit more than that. But anyway, at least 25% less, and it will pack just 17% fewer cores, though they are clocked 6% lower. There's a 25% reduction in L2 cache, though because both models use a 256-bit wide memory bus, the memory bandwidth has only been reduced by 7%. This is due to the use of 28 gigabits per second GDDR7 memory opposed to 30 gigabits per second for the 5080. So the performance downgrade here shouldn't be all that significant, and again with both models featuring a 16GB VRAM buffer, I think the $750 US price of the 5070 Ti is far more appropriate. Essentially, the 5070 Ti is replacing the 4070 Ti Super, coming in $50 cheaper, and it should offer a small performance upgrade. Of course, I have benchmarked both models, so we should go get into the results. But before we do, I should note that for testing, Nvidia has sent over the MSI Ventus 3X version of the 5070 Ti, which is slightly overclocked above spec, but please note for all of the testing, I ran the card at the reference clock speeds, as we do this for all models. But for those of you interested, here is how the Ventus 3X performs out of the box when installed inside an ATX case in a 21-degree room. After an hour, we saw a peak core temperature of 64 degrees and a memory temperature of 76 degrees at a fan speed of 1700 RPM. This allowed the card to average a core clock frequency of 2,780 MHz and consume 267 watts. So overall, a pretty cool running graphics card. Also on hand is the Gigabyte Aero OC model, and under the same conditions, this card peaked at just 59 degrees with a memory temperature of just 64 degrees, so quite a bit cooler than the Ventus 3X, but then the Aero OC is a much larger graphics card, which will no doubt cost more. We also saw an average core clock frequency of 2,820 MHz at a fan speed of 1,250 RPM with a power draw of 280 watts. Starting with Marvel Rivals, we see that the 5070 Ti at 1440p is comparable to the 4080 Super, and therefore the original 4080, and this made it just 12% slower than the 5080. It's also 14% faster than the 7900 XT and 17% faster than the 4070 Ti Super. so a reasonable performance uplift over the model it's replacing. Then at 4K, it remained 12% slower than the 5080, and again delivered 4080 super light performance, which made it around 20% faster than the 4070 Ti Super and 7900 XT. Next up, we have Stalker 2, and here the 5070 Ti is a lot less exciting, and we found the same issue with the 5080. Here the 5070 Ti was just a single frame faster than the 4070 Ti Super at 1440p, making it a mere 8% faster than the 7900 XT. Interestingly, it was also just 11% slower than the 5080. Then at 4K, it's just 5% faster than the 4070 Ti Super and 11% faster than the 7900 XT, so pretty disappointing results overall, I'd say. The new GeForce 50 series have all been pretty underwhelming in Counter-Strike 2 at 1440p, and the 5070 Ti is no exception, beating the 4070 Ti Super by a slim 1.5% margin, making it 8% slower than the 7900 XT. We do see much better results at 4K, but even here the 5070 Ti is just 10% faster than the 4070 Ti Super and a mere 5% faster than the 7900 XT, so not the most exciting results. Next up we have God of War Ragnarok, and here the 5070 Ti is 12% faster than the 4070 Ti Super at 1440p, as well as the 7900 XT. That margin is extended to 17% at 4K, so not quite 20%, which would start to become, I guess, more meaningful, but it's still one of the better margins that we've seen so far. Now, I'm not entirely sure why, but for whatever reason, the GeForce 50 series is very underwhelming in Delta Force, and as a result, the 5070 Ti is actually 4% slower than the 4070 Ti Super, and slightly slower than the 7900 XT. Increasing the resolution to 4K does help, but even so, the 5070 Ti is just 4% faster than the 4070 Ti Super, so in other words, performance with the new generation goes virtually unchanged in this example, which is obviously very disappointing. The Star Wars Jedi Survivor results are extremely underwhelming. Here it's just 9% faster than the 4070 Ti Super and 11% faster than the 7900 XT. As usual, the 4K data is a little more favourable, but even so, here the 5070 Ti is just 12% faster than the 4070 Ti Super. A Plague Tale Requiem has some of the more favourable 5070 Ti data that we've seen so far. At 1440p, it was 20% faster than the 4070 Ti Super, 24% faster than the 7900 XT, and just 11% slower than the RTX 5080. Oddly, however, it does slip a little bit at 4K, now leading the 4070 Ti Super by a 17% margin, and the 7900 XT by a 19% margin, though it did only trail the 5080 by a 13% margin. Cyberpunk 2077 has more underwhelming 1440p data for us, just a 9% uplift here when compared to the 4070 Ti Super, or 10% faster than the 7900 XT. That said, the 4K data is much more impressive, though probably not that impressive overall, as here the 5070 Ti is just 18% faster on average, or 14% faster than the 7900 XT. The Dying Light 2 results are more on the positive side of things, let's say. Here we're looking at a 19% improvement at 1440p, which also made it 17% faster than the 7900 XT, and then at 4K the margins extended to 25% over the 4070 Ti Super and 27% over the 7900 XT. So it's a real shame that we haven't seen more margins like this. The results in Dragon Age The Veilguard don't look too promising. Here the 5070 Ti was somehow slower than the 4070 Ti Super, trailing by a 3% margin at 1440p, making it just 9% faster than the 7900 XT. That said, when we jump up to 4K, we see that it's able to just edge out the 4080 Super, coming in 13% slower than the RTX 5080, but 11% faster than the 4070 Ti Super. The 5070 Ti struggled to improve upon the 4070 Ti Super's performance in War Thunder at 1440p, delivering an additional 5% performance with 378 frames per second. That margin grew to 10% at 4K, as here we're looking at 7900 XTX-like performance, while it was just 10% slower than the RTX 5080. Spider-Man Remastered saw almost no performance difference between the 5070 Ti and 4070 Ti Super at 1440p. The new model was a mere 1% faster. And even at 4K, we're only seeing a 5% performance uplift for the 5070 Ti though that did make it 14% faster than the 7900 XT. Moving on to Hogwarts Legacy. Here the 5070 Ti is 12% faster than the 4070 Ti Super at 1440p, though that did make it 15% slower than the 7900 XT. But if we increase the resolution to 4K, the 5070 Ti is now able to match the 7900 XT along with the RTX 4080, making it 14% faster than the 4070 Ti Super. The Last of Us Part 1 performance is pretty disappointing. Here the 5070 Ti is just 5% faster than the 4070 Ti Super at 1440p, and 4% faster than the 7900 XT. Then at 4K, it ends up beating both the 4070 Ti Super and 7900 XT by a 12% margin, so pretty much what we've come to expect at this point. Testing Star Wars Outlaws at 1440p only saw a 5% uplift for the 5070 Ti over the 4070 Ti Super, though that did make it 19% faster than the 7900 XT. Still, even at 4K, we're looking at the same weak gains, just a 6% uplift for an average of 36 FPS. And last up, we have Starfield. Here, the 5070 Ti is just 9% faster than the 4070 Ti Super and 7900 XT at 1440p with 85 FPS on average, so not amazing performance really. Then at 4K, things change quite a bit, but not to the advantage of the 5070 Ti, as here it's just 4% faster than the 4070 Ti Super, though it was 10% faster than the 7900 XT. But of course, even that's a highly disappointing result. Okay, so although we didn't look at the 1080p data, I do have the average results, so if you're interested, you can just pause the video here to take a closer look. Now at 1440p, the 5070 Ti was just 7% faster than the 4070 Ti Super, and just 8% faster than the 7900 XT, but it was also 12% slower than the 5080. So relative to the 5080 it looks pretty good, but then relative to the product it's replacing it looks extremely underwhelming. As we often saw, the 4K data was more favourable, and the margins do grow in the 5070 Ti's favour, though only slightly, as it's now 11% faster on average than the 4070 Ti Super. It was also 14% faster than the 7900 XT and 13% slower than the RTX 5080, so again quite good relative to the 5080, but then weak compared to the models it's meant to be replacing. Now for measuring power consumption, I'm using the MSI RTX 5070 Ti Ventus 3X OC, which I've manually downclocked to the official NVIDIA spec, as we test all GPUs at the reference clock speeds. However, MSI might have adjusted stuff like voltages, which can mess with efficiency, and this is likely why the 5070 Ti is seen to be consuming as much power, or in some instances more power, than the RTX 5080 in our testing. In short, the 5070 Ti uses roughly the same amount of power as the RTX 4080 and 4070 Ti Super, which generally makes it quite a bit more efficient than the Radeon RX 7900 XT. Okay, time for a look at ray tracing performance, and we'll start with Metro Exodus Enhanced at 1440p, where the 5070 Ti is 13% faster than the 4070 Ti Super, so it would seem RT performance hasn't been enhanced. That said, at 4K we are seeing a 24% performance increase, though we did see gains of over 20% in the raster testing, though it was rare. The Alan Wake 2 results though were very disappointing. Here at 1440p, the 5070 Ti was a mere 2% faster than the 4070 Ti Super. The margin though did open up a little bit at 4K, it's now 11% faster, which is a lot better, but now we're talking about 31 FPS with upscaling enabled, so not terribly usable in my opinion. Cyberpunk 2077 has more disappointing results for us, extremely disappointing in fact, as the 5070 Ti manages to somehow end up slower than the 4070 Ti Super at 1440p, albeit by a single frame. And even at 4K performance is much the same, so the 5070 Ti is 11% slower than the original RTX 4080, given it can only match the 4070 Ti Super, so a terrible set of results here in Cyberpunk. The 5070 Ti is CPU limited at 1440p in Spider-Man Remastered, and as a result, it is able to match the RTX 5080, making it just 8% faster than the 4070 Ti Super. So increasing the resolution does help, and at 4K, the 5070 Ti is now 16% faster than the 4070 Ti Super, so not an amazing result by any means, but certainly an improvement over what was seen at 1440p. Testing with Dying Light 2 at 1440p only saw the 5070 Ti outperform the 4070 Ti Super by a 13% margin, which also meant it was 13% slower than the RTX 5080. Jumping up to 4K slightly extended those margins. Now the 5070 Ti is 17% faster than the 4070 Ti Super and 14% slower than the RTX 5080. Then finally we have Black Myth Wukong, and at 1440p the 5070 Ti was just 6% faster than the 4070 Ti Super with 57 FPS on average, and remember we are using quality DLSS upscaling. Then at 4K, you get to enjoy a buttery smooth 31 FPS with the very high quality ray tracing preset enabled, along with quality DLSS upscaling, which is 17% better than the experience you'll get with the RTX 4070 Ti Super at 29 FPS. So I guess you could say it's an equally terrible experience. Now again, although we didn't look at the individual 1080p results, I do have the average data. So this is 1080p with quality upscaling, and again, pause if you want to examine these results. Now at 1440p with upscaling, the 5070 Ti was just 6% faster on average when compared to the 4070 Ti Super, so extremely underwhelming results there, and this also meant it was 9% slower than the RTX 4080 and 14% slower than the RTX 5080. Sadly, the 4K data isn't amazing either, just 13% faster than the 4070 Ti Super and 9% slower than the 4080 Super, with an average of just 51 FPS. So the 5070 Ti isn't really moving the needle forward in terms of ray tracing performance. It's still a technology that requires huge investment to really enjoy fully. Okay, so I have a number of pricing breakdowns for you, and we'll start with the official MSRP data, which at least on Nvidia's side of the fence has been horribly unreliable as of late. This is a big problem, because if the RTX 5070 Ti was to sell and really be readily available at the $750 US MSRP, it would be a good buy in today's market, offering the same level of value as the 7800 XT with drastically better RT performance and of course DLSS support. It would also be a 16% improvement in cost per frame when compared to the 4070 Ti Super, so not amazing for a next-gen product, but if you were in the market and were looking at spending around $800 US on a graphics card, the 5070 Ti would be exciting. That said, it would be if it were $750 US, and it seems unlikely that you're going to be able to snag one for that price. But let's stick with Nvidia's $750 US narrative for now and see how that compares to the best GPU pricing of mid-2024. As you can see, the 5070 Ti still stacks up really well, beating the value of the 7900 XT, essentially wiping that product out. It's also 14% better value than the 4070 Ti Super, so pretty good. Certainly not amazing after 12 months, but it is a step forward. And steps forward haven't been easy to come by in the GPU market. Now, although I'm sure there will be $750 US listings for the RTX 5070 Ti, stock levels are expected to be almost non-existent for those models. Rather, most models will be priced well over the $750 US MSRP, and in fact, the typical asking price is expected to be more like $900 US. So a similar situation to what we see with the RTX 5080, which is meant to cost $1,000 US, but really costs at least $1,200 US, and the 5090, which is meant to be $2,000 US, but is really more like $2,500 US. So if we adjust the RTX 5080 to $1,200 and the new 5070 Ti to $900 US, we see that the 5070 Ti is offering the same value as the 4070 Ti Super, so no improvement in cost per frame, and this is more what we've come to expect from Nvidia. Still, when compared to the 7900 XT, the 5070 Ti still looks great here because AMD screwed up the release pricing of that product so badly, it beggars belief. But what this data tells us is, if the RTX 5070 Ti sells for $900 US or more, it's a complete flop. You'd have been considerably better off buying an RTX 4070 Ti Super a year ago or an RTX 4070 Ti 2 years ago. Because having an additional 2 years of enjoyment out of your $800 US purchase adds considerably more value. even if 2 years later the same investment lands you 20% additional performance. Though the only problem with the 4070 Ti is that it is a very expensive 12GB graphics card. So I think the 4070 Ti Super is probably the better option of, well, the three potential options here. Now, the situation over in Australia is even worse somehow. And this data is based on current, so real, retail pricing. This means the 1700 XT stacks up better, though not much better, and certainly not well enough to recommend it, given it only improves the cost per frame by 6% when compared to the 4070 Ti Super. Now, the 5070 Ti is meant to have a recommended retail price, or RRP, of $1,509 Australian dollars. And again, while some base models will be listed at that price, stock is going to be extremely limited, and some retailers won't even have those models at all. Rather, the cheapest model you're likely to be able to get your hands on will cost 8% more at $1,630 Australian dollars. Though again, most models will cost even more than that. But what this means is, here in Australia, the cheapest RTX 5070 Ti's are coming in at an 11% increase in cost per frame over existing 4070 Ti Super stock. So 23% more money for 11% more performance. So yeah, that's pretty crap. Even at $1,509 Australian dollars, it sucks in my opinion. A direct conversion from $750 US to Australian dollars equals $1,180. Add in some tax and you're just shy of $1,300. So the current asking price of the 4070 Ti Super. But for some reason, another $200 Australian dollars has been tacked on, but really, it's going to be even more than that. So there you have it. If sold at the $750 US MSRP, the 5070 Ti would be a reasonable buy, at least in the current market. But opinions aside for a second, let's go over some of the facts. When compared to the 4070 Ti Super at 4K, the 5070 Ti is on average 11% faster, with margins seen as high as 24% in our testing, though margins of 20% or larger were quite rare, as that 11% average would suggest. The ray tracing performance was much the same, 13% faster on average, with margins of up to 24%. So typically speaking, the 5070 Ti is going to end up less than 15% faster than the 4070 Ti Super. Now, for those of you still using an older GPU, such as the RTX 3070 for example, the 5070 Ti is offering on average 103% greater performance at 1440p and 155% greater performance at 4K. So a massive upgrade there, though the MSRP has increased by 50%, or rather 22% if we adjust for inflation. You're also getting twice as much VRAM, which is a big one, given the RTX 3070's 8GB buffer is regularly run over these days. Of course, we're talking about the $750 US MSRP, which we know, at least for the release, isn't really a thing, and probably won't be for at least a few months. So it's going to be really interesting to see if AMD is able to capitalize on this and crush the 5070 series out of existence. I certainly wouldn't bet on it, especially given AMD's track record, but this is the best opportunity they've had to strike in years. There's really not much more to say about the 5070 Ti. At $750 US, it'd be a decent deal, certainly not amazing, not super exciting, but a good deal all the same. But at over $800 US, it's extremely disappointing and a regretful purchase for those of you who didn't just go and snap up a 4070 Ti Super like a year ago. For now, we're going to have to wait and see where pricing ends up, probably in a few months' time, and of course what AMD ultimately ends up firing back with. We will see that much sooner. So with that, I'm going to end this review of the RTX 5070 Ti. If you enjoyed it, give it a like. Let me know what you think about the 5070 Ti. And of course, we do have the 5070 coming up soon as well, so make sure you subscribe for that. We also have the join button, Patreon, if you want to become a Harbour Unboxed member. Gives you access to our exclusive Discord server, monthly live streams, Q&A stuff, and behind the scenes content. So check that out if you're interested. But if not, it's perfectly fine. And I would like to thank you for watching this video. I'm your host, Steve. See you again next time.